There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. I'm Tom Levine, the host of Tech Tuesday. We're also sitting here with Jess Larkin from the Build Your Brand series online. Today we're going to be going over talking points for GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting, some of their differences and some other bookkeeping things. Just so you know, this is the last webinar of our 2019 season, so you can look to us next year for more fun information. Just some bookkeeping notes. We're going to also have our resource center online. So if you want to review any of the webinars for Tech Tuesday, any of the other ones as well online, they're all available under our resource center. If you go onto our website, you just scroll over the resources tab, and I believe it's the second drop down. So if you go ahead and click that, you can gain access to all of our webinars to review, as well as all the white pages. Also, just to mention our 2020 rewards trip, we're going to be having a cruise in the Caribbean. The qualification period for that is any sale between January 1st and December 31st. That is a new sale, I believe.
A new sale, yes.
Yeah, a new sale. Any additional information is available online, and to register, go to www.crnstone.com/cruise-2020. So just jumping right in, we're going to be covering the differences between GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar today. I'll be focusing more on the GoToMeeting side, and Jess, the scheduler of all of our GoToWebinars, is going to be focusing on the main brunt of the GoToWebinar front. But the main differences between the two are really just the general format and intended use for both of the forums. GoToMeeting is really intended for small, face-to-face meetings or small group meetings. They're mainly conference-style calls, and they do have a few advanced presentation options available, but they're really focused on internal communication. GoToWebinar is focused on external events, kind of like what we're doing now. We're actually using GoToWebinar for this presentation as well, so you get to see a little bit of how that's different as well on your side. It's mainly used for large events, and it's more for presentation style meetings. So as far as setting up a meeting in GoToMeeting goes, there are two different types. First, we're going to be covering a impromptu meeting, and next we're going to be covering the scheduled meetings. Impromptu meetings are available in your meeting room. So when you log into your website, it's the first thing you see. As you see by the Joe's Meeting Room little icon up above, you see the Start Your Meeting and Share options on the left. That's the meeting room options. It's not password secured, and the meetings are unscheduled. Anyone can join as long as they have the access code. And it's recommended you try to use it under 10 minutes at a time, just because anyone can join. Because it's not password protected, anyone in your company with the login or anyone with any sort of access code for the meeting can just sort of join at any time. So it's really more of a casual or just random meetup place. The scheduled meetings are really what I'd recommend using if you're trying to sort of schedule something with someone, hence scheduled meetings. If you enter a meeting name and occurrence, as well as the time information, that's just the basics. There are tabs underneath the setup window for audio, co-organization, and the startup. The audio tab allows you to use other different conference call services, so you're not limited to the GoToMeeting platform. We'll be covering a few of the other options here on a later slide. But co-organizers enable you to add other organizers to the meeting and other people who can edit the meeting as well. And you can also add a password under the startup tab. That means that not only when you send out a meeting, they'll have a link to the meeting, but there will also be a password locking the meeting to any attendee who might randomly get the link but not have the password. It's a more secure meeting forum if you're trying to have a secured meeting between just like you and a few other people in your company. This is a view of the password prompt that I was talking about. It does pop up after you hit the go for the scheduled meeting on the last menu. It allows you to password lock the meeting. You just enter the password there in the box with the little notice below it. It also allows you to send all the employee emails the moment you hit copy. The access code is given to the attendees through the emails they receive, and just use www.gotomeeting.com in order to register and set these up. You can also edit your meeting once you have it prepared as well. This is just a view of what it'll look like once you create your meeting. underneath the scheduled icon above, there's this little drop-down called Test with 3 different icons to the right of it. You can see it. There's a trash can, a pencil, and a little person with a plus by his head. The trash can just deletes the meeting. It'll send out a notice that the meeting's gone to everyone else in attendance. And then you can also edit the meeting by clicking on the pencil. Opens up the same edit meeting function that you saw in the scheduled meeting slide 2 slides ahead. And also you're able to still invite new participants, so the minutes are fairly flexible. It is compatible with other apps, like I mentioned before. Some popular ones are EasyTalks, TrueConf, AnyMeeting, and some other ones. It's linked easily with Google's, I forget what they're called, but they have their own screen share app as well. It's compatible with that. You can also link accounts to your Outlook or Office 365 for scheduling assistance, and it's easily linked to pretty much any scheduling platform that I've seen. So it's a very flexible sort of feature that really makes it useful for any other scheduling app that you have. And without further ado, we'll turn it over to Jess for how to set up GoToWebinar.
Okay, so the GoToWebinar is actually, you access it through getting into your GoToMeeting login. So there's going to be an option for you to go into GoToWebinar. And when you go in there, there's going to be an option to schedule an event. And this is the screen that pops up when you go there. And this is where you can add an event title. You can create it as a live or recorded presentation, talk about the start date. So starting from the top, if you enter your event title, I would recommend that you use something that's a little bit more eye-catching rather than calling something Webinar 1 or, presentation. I would recommend, say if you're meeting with a financial planner and you're doing something co-op with them, maybe call it something fun like Money Talks, and that's going to grab somebody's attention when they see it. So that's where you enter your event title. And then right under here where it says, is this a live or recorded event? The live event is going to be actually in front of the people at the time that you set, whereas the recorded event is just going to be a recording of the presentation. Now, that doesn't mean that the live event does not allow you to record. You are still able to record your presentation when it's live. So today we'll be recording the presentation, then we'll be putting it on the Resource Center, and this is considered a live event. You then choose the occurrence for your webinar, which could be once daily, weekly, monthly, however often you would like to have this webinar. So if you plan to have a series, you can set it for weekly or monthly and choose the start date and the start time, and it'll help set it up for you. Also, when you choose whether you'd like a live or recorded event, once you choose one of those buttons, it's going to pop up with an option to choose how you want to interact with your attendees, which is either going to be a standard interaction or a webcast interaction. So the standard interaction is for up to 100 attendees, and it's going to be a little bit more hands-on because of the lower count. Whereas the webcast is for up to 3,000 attendees, and there's not going to be a dial-in number. So you can only log in with the audio using the computer, not through the dial-in number that you used for, say, this webinar. You can also make a webinar your standard choice once that pops up as well. So if this is kind of a webinar that you would typically set up, you can make this a standard choice so that it's easier to customize later. So when you hit schedule at the very bottom right here, then you will be able to customize your webinar even more. So when you go to the top here, you'll be able to see the title that you put together for your webinar. And here you can add a description for your webinar. And that's just going to be what you're talking about in the webinar. If you have any additional links that they can go to learn more before the webinar, I would put as much of a description there as possible because sometimes this is the only marketing that you have before people actually join the webinar. This is also where you can add organizers and panelists. The organizers are going to be able to help you set up the webinar. So they have more back-end access to the webinar than the panelists do. The panelists are just able to be presenters essentially, so you can hand over the screen share to them, or you can let them talk throughout the webinar and they'll be able to see the chat box that pops up. But the panelists will not be able to see the attendees. They won't be able to see a lot of the information that most of the organizers will be able to see. So that's the difference between the two. Now, if you have a situation like today where we had to kind of update the time for the webinar, you will want to click that send update email to all participants before you change the time of the webinar. And that's going to send an email to all of your attendees letting them know that the time has changed. All right, and under settings, this is where you'll be able to update a welcome message. So as you can see in the chat box, we kind of customize our message to say, welcome to the webinar. If you have any questions, leave them here. You're able to customize that message under the settings option. So if you go in there, you'll be able to write out exactly what you want your attendees to see as soon as they log into the presentation. You also have the option to change the branding and the colors on your webinar, and this is how you customize that landing page where all of your attendees actually go to register for the webinar. And this is so that it can match your business branding. So you can add your logo, you can add your colors, and you're able to preview that registration page with all those new colors and the new logo before you actually set up the webinar or send out the link. So that's a nice feature that they offer as well, and it just makes your webinar registration page look a little bit sharper. You can also share the webinar by just clicking off a link from under that share event section right here, or up here under share. Or you can share it on social media, which is another option. Under registration, you can create a password for your event if you want to make the event more private. You can also customize the questions that are asked during the registration process. So instead of the typical name, email, all the information that we typically collect for the registration, you can also add address, job title, industry, etc. Under emails, you are able to customize your messages for before and after the webinar, and these are actually pretty important. So you can customize when the emails are going to be released and what the text or like recordings or different things that you can use to engage your attendees, what you want to include with those emails. So that's a pretty important section, and I would encourage you to customize it each time you do have a webinar. And last but not least, you can engage your attendees using a survey, a poll, handouts, and this is going to help you determine the content that your audience wants to see and how you can improve the webinars and more. So for instance, we use a survey at the end of some of our webinars to help us get an understanding of exactly what's bringing value to you guys with both of these different webinar series. So that's something that you can do with your registrants as well, and you can ask any kind of question that you'd like. They offer a number of different question types, so you can do short answer, you can do multiple choice. There's a lot of different options. You can also include a handout in this section so that when your attendees show up to the webinar, they're able to download a PDF or whatever it is that you want to show them. So that'll pop up as soon as they log into the webinar, and you can add up to 5 handouts per webinar. Okay, so actually conducting your webinar. So when you actually go to start the webinar, this is sort of the screen that you're going to see. This is the screen that we're seeing on our computer. And I just want to note that your attendees are not able to see this dashboard. Just like you can't see ours right now, they won't be able to see yours. So when you want to start your webinar, remember to start the broadcast, which you can see up here. This usually says start the broadcast, but we grabbed this image from a practice round of a webinar. So you'll want to click start your broadcast, and that will mean that your presentation will begin to record, and you will be exiting what is known as the green room. The green room is a space for the organizers and the panelists to kind of get their ducks in a row before the webinar, before the attendees can actually hear them. So for instance, me and Tom were technically in the green room before we started the broadcast. So nobody could actually hear us talking, but we were chatting it up like old pals do. And once you start that broadcast, everybody's going to be able to hear you, and you'll be able to download the recording afterwards. Now, there's a couple of different options. We've also run into them requesting that you hit *1 to start the broadcast as well. So you'll just want to pay attention to this top portion up here where it says start before you start the broadcast to see exactly what they want you to do to actually get it started. So right under there, it says audience view, and that's going to show you what the attendees are seeing on their computer so that you can kind of make sure everything looks good for you. Under webcam, this is where if you have a laptop or a computer with webcam capabilities, you'll be able to use this feature to show your face during the presentation. But what we've found in the past is that if you do use a webcam option, the recording will not show the webcam. So that is sort of a drawback. There might be a workaround for that, but we haven't been able to find one just yet. Under audio, you'll be able to find your dial-in information, and you'll be able to see your audio quality. So if somebody is asking for the dial-in information, if they've logged into the GoToMeeting and they simply can't figure out the dial-in option, you can send that to them one-on-one because you'll have it right in front of them. And it's pretty useful because it can be kind of confusing for people that have never used GoToWebinar as an attendee to actually log in. So I would just keep that on hand before you actually get started so that you can help anybody out that needs it. Under the dashboard, it'll show how much time you have left for the webinar, the attendance and attentive rates, any questions, and any hand raises. So you're actually able to see who is paying attention during the webinar and who's kind of clicking around on their computer, and that's a pretty good metric to think about. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, under attendees, it'll show the number of attendees that you have and give any indicators for their actions during the presentation. So if they're asking questions, if they're muted or unmuted, if their hands are raised, etc. And under the staff portion, it's going to show the panelists and the organizers. And this section is going to give you the ability to make other organizers or panelists presenters so that they can show their screen. So both of those tabs are really important during the presentation. Under polls, this is only going to be included if you have a poll in your engagement option. So if you include a poll prior to the actual registration process, the tab is going to show up no matter what, but there will only be any information under there if there's actually a poll that you provided prior to the meeting starting. Under questions is the section where you can review and answer any of the questions, either to one attendee or to the entire group. So we typically look at the question section whenever we have the Q&A at the end of the presentation, and we typically answer them out loud, but you do have the option to type answers and send them either to the full group or to the individual attendee that answered the question. So that's a pretty big section as well if you intend to include a Q&A at the end of your presentations. The handout section is just like I talked about. That's where you can put any of the PDFs that you might want your attendees to see prior or during the presentation. You can put those there. Those will be automatically loaded as you customize the webinar prior to actually logging into it. So that's not really a section that you have to worry about too much. But when you do log into your webinar, I would double check and make sure that the handout is there just to make sure that the process worked for you. Under chat, this is a little bit different from questions, but it enables you to communicate with attendees during the presentation. So those two are a little bit confusing and they are pretty similar, but this is going to help you communicate with the entire audience rather than just answering questions. You also have some options for drawing tools, so you can highlight, spotlight, or write, and that's with this little pencil button right here. The problem with this is that it's a little bit clunky to use, I found. I'm not sure if Tom has used it in the past, but you have to, whenever you draw something, before you can move forward, you have to erase that drawing from the screen. And it's just a bit of a clunky process, but it is available if you're wanting to use it. So maybe it's something that you might want to look through.
And I will say it's very clunky. I wouldn't recommend
it
at all. It messes with you completely.
Yeah, it kind of adds a little bit of extra awkward space, and it's just, it might not be worth it to even try. I would actually prefer using the pens that are available on PowerPoint to, point to anything that you might need to point to. But the option is available if you ever want to use it.
And I recommend just describing exactly what you're talking about in the image. It's honestly a lot easier.
Yeah, that's easy too.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the GoToWebinar video library, and this is back on your GoToWebinar dashboard when you actually log into the system. So after your webinar, if you recorded the presentation, you'll be able to download it from this screen. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there are a number of different icons, and there's one with a bit of that looks like a film with a play button in the middle, and that's where you're going to go to download your video. So you click on that button, and then when you're brought to this page, then you'll want to click on the three dots to the side of the recording that that you want to download, and then you'll click download. And it's just going to download in your browser like any other file that you might want to download. All right, the next thing I want to talk about pretty quickly is just interpreting your webinar analytics. And this is something that might be pretty intimidating to some people, figuring out exactly what those analytics might mean. But GoToWebinar makes it pretty simple. Excuse me. And they keep it individual to your specific webinars, or they provide an overview of all of the webinars that you've given over time. So these are actually pretty easy to figure out. So if you click on an individual webinar that you've already had and you want to see how it did, you'll be able to look at those analytics for those individual sessions. And there are a couple of different analytics that you might want to look at. So the first are the registrants and the attendees. And the reason that you want to look at both is because you want to see how many people have interest in the webinar, so how many people registered for the webinar, and how many people were actually able to attend the webinar. And if you have a high registration count and a low attendee count, that might mean that recorded webinars are going to be more valuable for you in the future rather than live webinars. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, if you have attendees during your webinar, you'll want to look at the attendance rate. And like I said, the attendance rate is how often the people are looking at their screen as they're listening to the webinar. If the attendance rate is quite low, they might only be interested in what they're hearing from the webinar rather than the visuals that are presented on the screen, which might give you an indication of whether or not you really need to spend too much time on the visuals, or if you can just focus on the things that you're talking about. Oh, sorry, that's the attentiveness. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. The attendance rate is actually the percentage of the people that actually attended the webinar. And the interest rating, I'm pretty sure, is close to the same thing. And the attendance conversion is the amount of people that registered for the webinar and actually came into the webinar and attended it. So those are just a couple of stats that you might want to look at. And the last are the engagement stats. So if you provide a poll, if you provide a survey, and if you had any questions during your presentation, these are the stats that you're able to look at. So you'll be able to see what the results of the poll were. You'll be able to see the results of your surveys, how many people had responded, all of their answers for the responses, and you'll be able to review any of the Q&A that happened during the presentation. And you'll be able to see your answers, and you'll be able to see those questions and who asked those questions. So it's pretty intuitive, and you can get a lot of information just by taking a quick look at that page after your webinar. You can also generate reports for your analytics. I would say that this isn't totally necessary if you don't want to do it, but something that might be very helpful is the registration report. So if you want to see who actually registered or who attended your webinar and you want to see their email and you might want to get in contact with them, these reports might be helpful for you. And these will download into an Excel document or a CSV file. And just thinking about these webinar analytics, it's important to review them, if only just to glance at them if you're having more webinars in the future, because it's going to help you determine what your audience's preferences are for the content of the webinar, what is grabbing their attention when you're actually hosting these webinars, when you're hosting these webinars, so the time of day or the time of the week, or whether a recording is going to be better, and the creatives and the visuals. So if they're attentive, are they interested in the creatives or the visuals that you're posting, or are they just interested in what you have to say, as we discussed before? So those are some things to keep in mind when you're going through your analytics and determining what your audience actually wants from you. All right, now we're going to talk about the pricing for both of these products.
Like I said before, there are a lot of different options actually for GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar. One of the big things about GoToWebinar, though, is that you get all of the GoToMeeting options when you sign up with GoToWebinar as well. I believe the levels correspond exactly. So if you get the starter, which is shown at the very top right here, plan for GoToMeeting, that'll correspond to what I'm about to show you with the light pricing for GoToWebinar, and so on and so forth. The different options are split up by per month and per year. Annually, and month by month. So for the starter plan, if you pay annually, it breaks down to about $14 a month. Wow, that's mistyped, but or $168 per year, basically. So it breaks down by being billed annually or being billed month to month. The plan levels include different options. The starter plan actually starts with 10 participants, able web audio sharing, screen sharing, unlimited meetings, etc. The main difference as far as the GoToMeeting price points are the number of participants that can attend, as well as a few other interactive things in your webinars. The reason to go from starter to pro, in my opinion, other than unlocking a lot more participants, is the ability to do meeting logs and transcripts of your meetings, as well as a personal meeting room that we covered earlier and the unlimited recordings. That's really very useful if you're trying to get a recording of your session with someone to record a training tool and etc. We've already covered some of the drawing tools and why they're not necessarily the most useful, but you also get the ability to keyboard and mouse share, which is really useful for instructional videos, as well as your Active Directory. The plus option, in my opinion, isn't really worth the money because all it does is add 100 participants and an in-room link, but the enterprise plans are very useful for GoToMeeting. You get volume discounts, onboarding and training, advanced webinar features, and 24/7 customer support, which is just so useful. The prices are negotiable as well, and I'll have the sales phone line for you on our next slide. Then we have GoToWebinar pricing options, and as you can see already, the pricing is a little bit higher. Just for the light version, instead of paying the small amount that you were originally just for the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar bumps it up by $40 a month. It's a very, very extensive version of the program. So it's got a lot more to it, which is why I'd recommend going for the GoToWebinar option. But unless you're planning on hosting large events like we do at Cornerstone, it might not really be the best for you. There's also the standard plan, which if you're going to invest in GoToWebinar, I'd highly recommend. It adds the ability to record videos, do that video sharing and video embedding options, as well as gives you access to a channel page. And while that might not necessarily be the best for just one channel if you're trying to host several series, it's useful if you're trying to have a place to store all of your recordings and post them to anyone who's trying to view your page overall. It allows you to actually gain access to a few other features and customize your marketing to more than just one series. Then you also have the Pro plan, which adds 250 more participants, expands those channel options, adds source tracking, allows you to view the certificates for the videos, as well as edit the videos within the GoToWebinar platform. The video editor is kind of basic in my opinion, but if you have no other video editing software, it's a lot less expensive than just investing into After Effects or something like that. It also gives you access to the transcripts like the GoToMeeting line does, as well as custom URLs and recorded events. And then we have enterprise plans. Unlike the last tier, the enterprise plan here is not really negotiable, but if you call into that sales phone line at the bottom, I'm certain GoToWebinar is willing to work with you. One of the things that I found online is that the salespeople are absolutely willing to work with the functions and features, and if you're trying to set up something like an enterprise plan, they'll negotiate with you. Cornerstone actually is on a different plan that was grandfathered in. So if you've already got a GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar thing and you didn't see any of the pricing options listed, then it's likely that you've been grandfathered into an old plan and you don't necessarily have to update to match the new pricing, although they will prompt you to switch. So if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to type them in our questions box. We will be back next year in 2020. And I'd highly recommend you send me some suggestions for Tech Tuesday or just suggestions for what you want to see and build your brand. My email address is tlevine, Levine, @crnstone.com. If you have any specific things you'd like to see in our upcoming series, like focuses on Excel, PDFs, conversion of file types, or conversion and editing of videos even, please feel free to drop me a line and let me know. Jess?
Yeah, and if you have any questions for the Marketing and Communications Department, either me or Marilyn Schultz, you can get in contact with us at jlarkin@crnstone.com, and we can help you with ideas for refreshing your brand. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions about that.
All right. So we'll be on the line for a few more minutes here to take questions. Feel free to type them in and let us know. Well, I guess we did a good job.
Hey, we did.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff Beglin, for your wonderful question.
Yes.
All right, I think we can wrap it up for today. If you do have any additional questions, though, feel free to contact us or go to the source. You can contact GoToWebinar or GoToMeeting. I'm sure they will be able to help you out if this is something that you're interested in. But webinars are a good value-added way to get in contact with your clients. So it's something that you might want to consider maybe going into the 2020 season. So thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you in 2020.
Absolutely. Thank you.